Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you may join us today. My name is Giuseppe. I would like to officially open the session of Climate Change, Emergencies, and Cultural Heritage Speaker Series, which is being presented in partnership with Heritage Ottawa with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. This area is known as the Toronto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation and Haudenosaunee Confederacy and Huron Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current territory holders, the Mississaugas of Credit First Nation. The territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lake region. As this is an online event, our participants may be joining from various locations, so I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I welcome our moderator, our speaker, and our participants from around the world. Welcome to our webinar. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Dr. Bruno Genito. Dr. Genito is a professor at the University of Naples, L'Orientale, teaching Iranian art, history, and archaeology, and Central Asian art and archaeology since 2013. He has served as a director of Serious Major in Department of Asia, Africa, and Mediterranean. Dr. Genito has several fields of interest, including Iranian archaeology from Iron Age and Islamic period, archaeology of Central Asia from Iron Age and early medieval time, and archaeology of the Silk Road. He and his team are state-of-the-art research in heritage documentation of historic monuments. Dr. Genito, thank you very much for moderating today's session. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the short presentation to myself also. I'm very glad to be here again in this Climate Change Emergency and Cultural Heritage Speaker Series Session 7. And I don't know directly the speaker of this session, but I'm very honored to make also a short presentation to him. Dr. Giuseppe Forino is a lecturer in planning at the University of Salford in UK. He's a human geographer, and he got 2 different PhD in economic geography at La Sapienza University of Rome in Italy, and another one in disaster management at the University of Newcastle in Australia. His research interest cover disaster risk management, risk governance, climate change, risk governance, disaster project management, and disaster management into higher education. His areas of interest are Italy, Australia, and Southeast Asia, Myanmar, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Thailand. And Giuseppe Forino also took part in the national research project founded by the European Union, the OLT Australia, and Save the Children. So I can pass the turn to Giuseppe Forino. I think he has about 40 minutes for reading or speaking on his research activity. He will present a paper with the title Cultural Heritage and Climate Change Challenges, a multi-actor perspective from coastal areas in North Wales, UK. Please, Dr. Forino, you can start.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Bruno Genito. And thank you also to Korosh and Ali for the invitation. So I will share my screen, and I hope you would see it. So,
yeah, we can see easily.
Yeah, I will minimize the screen. Okay. So, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation and for the for mentioning my biography. As Bruno was saying, I am Giuseppe Forino, and I am a lecturer in planning at the School of Science, Engineering and the Environment at the University of Salford, which is located in Manchester, so in UK. I just started here 6 months ago, and previously I was a lecturer in human geography at Bangor University in Wales, which is the reason why I am talking about North Wales in this seminar on the interaction between climate change and cultural heritage. What I would like to present today is a multi-actor perspective from coastal areas in North Wales. Essentially, I will present a couple of projects, small projects that I undertook in my time at Bangor University, which allowed me to still collaborate with Bangor University, with the team of people I'm going to share soon, and we are trying to to develop our perspective and to continue working together on this topic on cultural heritage and climate change in North Wales. The outline of the project, I'm going to present the Clicker project, which is the first project which I did last year, running from January to March 2023 at Bangor University. And the second one is the Interdisciplinary Pan-Wales Network for Climate and Heritage. So it's another small project funded for creating a network of scholars and practitioners working on climate change and cultural heritage, with a focus on Wales, but not limited to Wales. And I know that some of the people in the call are part of this interdisciplinary network, so I'm very happy about this. And I will finish with some joint consideration for a multi-actor perspective. Essentially, these projects are about questioning a sort of top-down research approach on cultural heritage, and rather trying to be inclusive, or at least to reflect about the possibility to integrate other voices within debate of around cultural heritage and climate change. So what is the Clicker project? The Clicker is a sort of acronym for abbreviation for climate change, cultural heritage, and communication in North Wales. The project was funded by NERC, which is the Natural Environment Research Council, which funds a lot of projects around the environment in the UK under the Discovery Science goal. It was quite a short project, as I mentioned before. So it was just 3 months from January to March 2023. But I think we did a lot of things in this very short time frame. And the key research question was how we can value cultural heritage in order to provide the public with a better understanding of climate change. So again, cultural heritage is a way, so protecting cultural heritage is a way for exploring and communicating climate change to a large, let's say, to a larger public, so outside just the academic circle. Now, probably most of you are not super familiar with North Wales, so I just want to, so this is the North Wales coast, more or less. This is where Bangor is located. So here we have Liverpool and Manchester, and here we have the beautiful Anglesey Island. So this is a stunning area full of small cities and villages, which are quite touristic in the summer, particularly because, of course, there are a lot of influx of tourists from Liverpool and Manchester. So we have Rhyl, we have Colwyn Bay, Llandudno, Conwy, Bangor itself, Carnarvon, not to mention the whole Anglesey Island. So these areas are, they have a very scenic beauty. They are really valued in terms of cultural heritage, and there is a lot of tourism developed around it. If I can locate on a bigger map of the UK, here is where North Wales is located. So again, there are a lot of big cities which provide, let's say, a lot of tourists, particularly in the spring and summer season. So Liverpool, Manchester, but also Birmingham. So the research team, as I mentioned also before starting the call to Bruno, we wanted to have a sort of interdisciplinary discussion around this topic. So the project funded by NERC included me as a principal investigator and 3 other people as co-investigators. So I was the human geographer, but then we had Dr. Linda York, which is a senior lecturer in physical geography. Dr. Gary Robinson, who is a senior lecturer in archaeology, and Dr. Martin Austin, which is a senior lecturer in ocean sciences. So as you can see, we have sort of 4 different skills and background that try to work together for providing a common understanding of climate change challenges for cultural heritage. So what we did, we had 2 work packages. So the work package 1 was a series of workshops to engage with different local stakeholders, which I will show in a minute. And then we had a second work package, which was a sort of final outreach event around best practices for communicating climate change in a cultural heritage context. These meetings were run between February and March 2023. We had around 70 participants across the 3 meetings, but of course I think we had a lot of interest as well from people who could not attend. But then we had quite a good positive feedback from from the local environment, let's say. So because the team was interdisciplinary, we were reflecting on the Welsh places, which have very strong identity, and on their geological and coastal processes, but also on their cultural heritage. And we tried to explore these in terms of the global challenges posed by climate change. So we tried to put together these 3 or 4 different topics in order to understand how the local space can withstand the global challenge such as climate change. Again, we did 2 workshops, 21st and 27th of February in the Snowdonia National Park. So Snowdonia National Park is literally the institution of North Wales. It's one of the most stunning environment of the UK. So we met in the park to gather data from these different stakeholders, from key actors such as local communities, policymakers, practitioners, also academics, of course. So we gathered at least 4 different expertise in order to explore experiences around climate change and cultural heritage, and also to explore workshop ideas. The meetings included participatory breakout groups so that people could talk in small groups. The data that we collected contributed to the development of the outreach event. And a very interesting thing that we did was that we also let's say, worked together with 2 drawing artists from the artist group More Than Minutes to graphically record the workshops. And I will show you later their graphical records. And I think that it will be very, very interesting for all of you, because for us it was really a way for understanding the comprehensive, understanding in a more comprehensive way all the challenges, all the topics that were discussed during the meeting, but we also use them as a pedagogical tools. I will show you later today in this presentation. So the workshop contents, again, we did, I think, 3 different moments of breakout groups so that participants, first of all, can tell us their personal experiences of climate change as well as of cultural heritage, using, probably a quite abused word, but I think it's still very powerful, which is storytelling. We wanted to discuss climate change issues for cultural heritage, but also understand which could be the potential solutions or better, rather than solutions, some ideas that then can be proposed and become solutions in the medium and long term. The goals were first to understand the experiences and perceptions of climate change and cultural heritage, as I mentioned before. The other goal was to explore the issues that facing cultural heritage. And the third one was to determine best practice for communicating climate change to a larger audience. Let's try to go now a bit deeper in what the people told us in these breakout groups. So what cultural heritage in North Wales is, and needless to say, it's composed of natural and anthropogenic features. Wales is full of beautiful landscapes, of course, landscapes which have been created by across the centuries by people. And I'm saying nothing new. Every place in the world is created by the interaction of humans and the nature. But the heritage is cultural, is historical, is geological. So you have castles, which are really landmarks of the places. You have very important beaches, which are other landmarks of the places. You have villages, but you have also very natural landscapes. You have Anglesey Islands. You have rivers. You have agricultural landscapes. And of course, they are historical because they have been created from the work of the people across the century. But cultural heritage in North Wales is also governed by a complex governance, where you have, of course, the Welsh government, the different local governments, but you have also the National Trust, the National Heritage Trust, the parks, different heritage bodies, archaeological bodies, and so on. This means that there are different stakeholders which try to manage cultural heritage according to their own mission or vision. So policymakers have their own vision. People have their own vision of leisure and attachment. Businesses can make profits of it. So how does different visions try to establish a dialogue together? However, cultural heritage is also hidden heritage. So not all the heritage is really visible, immediately visible. You can have physically hidden heritage. So you can have shipwrecks, pit deposits, submerged forests, and so on. But you also have this hidden heritage, which is emotional. So a lot of cultural heritage is made of places where people spend their everyday life. It can be a beach, can be a square, can be a road, can be a social space. It doesn't have to be cultural heritage in an official sense or in a formal sense, but very often cultural heritage is something a bit more emotional. So deriving from the experiences and attachment of people in living that place in their everyday life. Of course, in all the places in the world, cultural heritage in North Wales is also threatened by climate change related hazards. The hazards which were currently mentioned were flooding, sea level rise, but also pollution, and we are going to see this later. Of course, there have been environmental changes in the last decade. So there is anthropogenic climate change there that is contributing to change a bit some climate factors. But there is also a question of accessibility. So how the cultural heritage can be accessible if climate change related challenges will hit a specific cultural heritage asset or place or area. The risks of climate change are also related to new development in areas at risk of flooding, for example, in Anglesey Island. So there are new development, new housing which are being built, in particular for tourist purposes. And so it's clear that the actual structural measures are not sufficient. So you need for an update in terms of structural defenses, but also in terms of policies and planning. This is something that the Welsh government and the local governments are really working on in the last decades. Another topic that came out was that climate change is increasing the insurance price for some assets. And another topic that was mentioned, and I think it's very, very important, is tourism. there are a lot of places north in the coast or northwest which really live with tourism. Of course, tourism is an opportunity, it's an economic, it's a cultural opportunity, but it's also a challenge in terms of mass tourism, in terms of pressure on local environment, but also on people. So this is a recurrent topic that was also mentioned. So we have different voices. So we have the government voices. We had some Northwest councils which were represented in these meetings. And all of them were mentioning that, of course, climate change response is a statutory provision. So it must be done because it's part of the mission of the local governments. However, there are always resource constraints, which are mainly economic, which means that as a protection of a specific asset is prioritized based on an economic assessment. So essentially, the cost-benefit ratio needs to be positive. This, of course, means that protection really comes from an economic perspective. So if the good to protect is, if the cost of the protection is smaller than the value of the building of the asset, then that cultural heritage asset is protected. But it's just, can we just think to cultural heritage in economic terms? So we probably need to think about it in different ways, in alternative ways. Sorry. Then we had practitioners' voice. We had, for example, some heritage bodies and trusts which were represented. So some people working every day for protecting cultural heritage. Of course, their mission is protection, conservation, valorization, but they also started to recognize that heritage is beyond the landmark and tourist hotspots. So they understand that cultural heritage is also something for which is not labeled as such, but that is important for people. Needless to say, also these bodies and trusts suffer of economic resource constraints. So again, how can we protect places in a resource constraint regime? Community voices. So we had some representatives from local communities from nearby Bangor and Northwest areas. It is clear that there is an attachment to cultural heritage in Northwest. Northwest is a very identitarian areas. A lot of people were born and grew up and live in the place where they are born. So they have a strong sense of attachment to different parts of the village or of the area. However, they always say that cultural heritage is not just the main spot in tourist destinations. So there's tourist hotspots, there's important beaches, the castles which are visited every year by thousands of people. But mainly and foremost, climate change is part of that, are those places, so the cultural heritage is made of those places where people live their everyday life. So where they walk the dog, where they meet friends, where they sit down to share things with people. So again, there is this shared different life to climate change, a very informal and unofficial description of cultural heritage. People also recognize climate change and its risk for cultural heritage. So it's a myth that we are the only one who have the expertise of or the knowledge of risks around climate change. People have their own knowledge too, and they are also committed in protecting cultural heritage. As I will show later, probably they are not protecting cultural heritage as such, but they are doing community initiatives, community activities that help protecting the local environment. This is what I was mentioning before. So this is a graphical representation of the, let's say, of the discussion that I just presented. So the two artists, they drew the topics simply while we were talking. So this is all made live. So can you imagine in a few hours doing something something that can be presented, you know, in an occasion like this, and that also helps us connecting the dots. Now, there are a lot of topics that emerged. This is the result of the first meeting. I'm going to show now also the one of the second meeting. So as you can see, there are a lot of topics that emerged, from communication to protection to actors to different stakeholders to intersectionality to engagement. So as you can imagine, there are a lot of contents here. These need to be unpacked, but this representation is very useful to summarize in a comprehensive way all the topics that emerged in the two discussions. So this is the first. This is the result of the first meeting, and this is the result of the second meeting. I think that this is probably even more intriguing than the first one, because in the second meeting, there were a lot of keywords that emerged. So storytelling, the responsibility, conservation, the conflicts, let's say, around tourism. So, but also the narrative of climate change, the oral history of cultural heritage and climate change. So again, probably the second meeting was really a bit more interesting in terms of moving beyond traditional views of cultural heritage and climate change. What is interesting about their things, there's two drawings, is that we use them as a pedagogical tool for the outreach event which took place in March at Bangor University. We used, and I just want to show them again, we used this to promote discussion around the participants. So we just put them in the wall. Unfortunately, I don't have the picture. I'm very sorry, because the pictures were very, where they really revealed what we did in these meetings, but I didn't find the picture. Sorry. So we put these drawings in front of a wall, and people just went there and started. They just looked at them and started to discuss with each other, even though they didn't know each other, even though they are from different backgrounds. So it was a very powerful way to start a discussion around these topics. So the outreach event was in some way a way for presenting the data that we had collected in these two meetings to a larger audience. Again, the question was how we can value cultural heritage in order to have a better understanding of climate change, but also how we can adapt to climate change at the local level. But we also wanted to co-create a sort of knowledge for a practical toolkit which is able to engage diverse communities. I tell you, at the end, we didn't create the practical toolkit because it was probably too far beyond the short time frame of the project. However, we were able to put together different people at the same table and for sure co-create knowledge together with them. Indeed, we had over 35 people from 40 people from academia, policymakers, and local communities. So there were also university students. So we were really different people from very diverse background, but the power of the two drawings was that they were able to stimulate an open discussion around people with very different backgrounds. What came out from this discussion? First, it came out that there is a response from the public, and the public is responsive and responsible. So we always say that public do nothing, that public doesn't understand. That's wrong. They respond to climate change. Sometimes there's actions, there's local initiatives, there's local practices are not labeled as climate change something or climate change responsive actions, but they tackle climate change. For example, there are community initiatives that maintain neighborhoods in a good state, ensuring the sustainability of the neighborhood, cleaning the beach, acting individually or collectively to support local people in need, but also discussing local issues with local policymakers. Those were all a series of initiatives that came out from the discussion, and very few of them were labeled under a climate change label. However, all of them support climate change response, also for cultural heritage, because they intervene on the environment, they intervene on the social issues, they intervene on the dialogue with policymakers. So again, they are as important as the formal climate change action from politics, from policies, or from the communities which are labeled as climate change initiatives. I just introduced before, it's not just climate change, and this is important. We know from literature that the things we do to the response to climate change must be incorporated, must be contextualized within larger set of actions that do not have necessarily target, do not have necessarily to target climate change. Sustainable transportation, place accessibility, education, regular infrastructure maintenance, improved planning, sustainable tourism, climate change impacts on the everyday life. These are all things that emerge from the discussion with local communities, policymakers, and so on. So again, to respond to climate change for cultural heritage protection, these are all things that are helpful. Sustainable transportation in a place such as North Wales, where in the summer there is mass tourism, very car dependent, there is a need for sustainable transportation from train. Of course, there is train, but how to ensure the sustainability of local transportation in peak tourist time. Place accessibility, not all the places are accessible in the summer. It depends from the money, it depends from the ability, the capability for you to walk or to climb, but also education. A lot of people from local communities told we need to talk about this with kids, with students, with pupils, but also we need to educate each other to cultural heritage and climate change. Infrastructure maintenance, improved planning, all the things help also sustainable tourism. But also climate change part of a bigger picture of the everyday life, particularly in aging communities of North Wales, which can suffer from some heat waves in the summer or from very cold weather in the winter, in particularly in most remote locations, but also in coastal areas due to wind, storm surge, and so on. So is our expert knowledge more valuable than the local knowledge? I would say no, and this is what came out from this discussion. It's clear that the communication around climate change impacts on cultural heritage is very often top-down driven. So it's the academics telling to the people what is going on. But also there is an exclusive reliance on climate data, scenarios, projections, which are, of course, are super, super important, but sometimes they are not understandable for the general public, or we are not very good in explaining them in an easier and accessible way. Indeed, our expert knowledge and the language we use very often does not match non-academic languages. So the language of the general public, the academic jargon we use doesn't match the non-academic and the lay language. But also general public is not put in the condition to claim their voice. Very often they feel they don't have the necessary political arena or knowledge arena where they can say their things. So again, these are things that came out from that outreach event. So I'm going to finish. So what we try to propose, we propose that the diversity of stakeholder voices, which is probably just a sort of common sense, let's say, but of course, no one is denying that we need to have a rigorous academic research approach. Most of us are academics, so we know what does it mean. However, we need to find a way to communicate this to the general public and to include the general public within these research approaches, within these rigorous research approaches. Communicating and including communicating to the general public and including the general public doesn't mean that the research approach lose rigor. It's okay to have a functional approach by policymakers. We know policymakers, they have their own languages, they have their own technocentric approach. It's not wrong, but it has to be open to less tangible approaches, so to the emotions and the feelings of the people around places. Why? Because policymakers govern places which are the places, where people live their everyday life. So where people have their emotions, their feelings, where we have our emotions and feelings. So there's intangible values need to be part of, need to establish a dialogue with more functional and technocentric approaches by policymakers. Of course, the approach by the community quite often is predominantly experiential and emotional. These are not bad words, they are very good words, but they also recognize the practicality, the feasibility and operationalization of things, and they are open to know more. So again, what I wanted to say with these slides is that the stakeholders have diverse approaches, they have diverse voice, but they are open to know more, they are open to engage with each other. So I think that this is the strength of the dialogue that we can bring in a discussion of around climate change challenges for cultural heritage. So for a more inclusive perspective, it's okay to have a technocentric approach, but not just a technocentric approach. Climate data, climate scenarios, projections, and evidences are still essential, but we also need to use storytelling as a powerful tool. Listening to people, listening to everyday stories, listening to everyday life stories, they are data that we can use for understanding better cultural heritage and then climate change. A lot of people also told that they want to use imagination and art to communicate. This is why they really appreciated the drawings, because they were a very impactful way for starting a discussion, probably even more than, boring climate data scenarios. Why? Because they are difficult to understand unless you don't explain them very well. But also we need to have a life-centered understanding of the world. So we need to do things because we want to protect the life, because we give value to life. So what is more important than understanding the everyday life of people, even for doing science, even for doing rigorous academic research? So that was, let's say, they were the main findings from the Clicker project. Now I'm going just to show very briefly, I think I have just a couple of slides, this interactive Northwest network for cultural heritage. We got some money fund from the Learned Society of Wales to create an interdisciplinary network of researchers in order to promote interdisciplinary research on cultural heritage in Wales. And indeed, we had 2-3 meetings with in an interdisciplinary network. There are human geographers, physical geographers, archaeologists, GIS experts, architects, disaster managers, low experts and so on. Why? Because we think that to change the perspective of cultural heritage, and climate change, you need to have a variety of people talking. Our goal is to develop an innovative and methodological sound, inclusive, and long-term engagement with non-academic stakeholders. We are still at the beginning. We are trying to do that. Hopefully, we will have money and opportunity in the future to do this. But just as initial network reflections, again, they really overlap with the fundings from the outreach event. So we need to move beyond technocentric approaches. Physical science, social sciences, arts and humanities have to work together. We need to co-produce knowledge across different actors. We need to create relationship with people living the places in order to understand the places. Why? How? We need to put together the tangible and intangible heritage. So not just cultural heritage as such, but also the everyday life of people, the places where people meet every day or where people have a sense of attachment. Of course, we need to avoid the romanticization of local knowledge. We know that there are a lot of flaws and a lot of issues in that vision, but we also recognize that we have our own limitations and challenges in our own academic or research language. The idea is to be inclusive and to develop inclusive and long-term approaches. We all know the challenges, particularly that funds give us just very short sort of limited time frame to do this. But anyway, at least we have this intention, and we hope to do it to start it soon in the near future. So some joint consideration for cultural heritage and climate change. So diversity is key. We need to engage diverse array of people. The experts, so our knowledge is not the only valuable one. People have their knowledge. Tangible and non-tangible inputs do not clash. Actually, they collaborate together. We need to have a rigorous approach, but it has to be easy to understand. We need to talk the language of people, not just our academic language, academic jargon. Data are important, but also creativity is important. Imagination is important, but also one size doesn't fit all. So we need to find tailored solution for specific problems. We need to have a sort of general vision, but then we need to implement solutions based on what the place tells us. So I have finished it. So I just want to advertise a bit a blog that we published at the end of our work, The Need for a People Perspective When Exploring Climate Change and Cultural Heritage, published on Geographic Direction, which is a blog of the Royal Geographical Society. And some of the things I'm saying have been also published in a chapter with a Mexican colleague in a new book by Giuseppe and Ksenia Chmutina. So I think that's all. So thank you very much for listening. If you have any question, I'm happy to respond now. And you also have my email if you want to contact me at the end of the meeting. So thank you very much. Do I stop sharing? What do you suggest to do? Hello?
Yes,
No.
I think Bruno is on mute if he's talking. I don't know.
Could you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
sorry.
Yes.
I did not know why my microphone was out. Anyway, so I wanted to thank very much Giuseppe Forino for this very ample and very wide perspective. That's why the title was multi actor perspective, because the question of the cultural heritage and the climate change is so particular and so complex question that, of course, the answers are very different. Different countries, different climate, different climate changes. And of course, I would like also to thank him very much, because he was suggesting many different aspects which can be used also in different reality in different countries. For example, the question of the tangible and intangible heritage, which generally is not very much emphasized, telling the truth, except from the ethnographic point of view, for example. And so I think that this interdisciplinary approach is one of the most possible and most fruitful perspective in analyzing such complex situation. I just can remember some expression he was using, the relationship with the general government, the local government, the heritage, the archaeological, for example, trust, and also, for example, the tourism, which is particularly significant in such a mass society where we're living now, and probably also in the future. But of course, I remember, for example, some of my friends who were working in Pompeii, which is a very famous cultural heritage, archaeological cultural heritage place, and the number of the people visiting Pompeii, it is going to be a disaster for managing in the correct way, which is not related to the restoration, to the preservation of the remains, but because 1 million of people every year, it's really impossible to manage, or you should have a lot of money. Yeah, this is only an example, of course. I don't know the reality of Wales, so I don't know exactly which are the most important aspects to be solved, and especially to be, you were mentioned another important, the accessibility, which in my opinion is to have the more possibility to transmit, to transfer the knowledge. We should be academic, but not only academic, because the mass society are not made only by academic professors, of course. Anyway, so I don't have special question to put to you. I wanted just to thank you very much. Of course, we can discuss for 1 hour about your perspective, and also your different 3 projects, the Cliche project, the Interdisciplinary Pan Nodes Network for Climate and Heritage, and the last consideration. I do not understand if maybe there are some questions. Yes, I can read, and I'm asking to Giuseppe Forino to answer. So Susan Moradi say, which platform of statistical method have you used for analyzing and assessing the large amount and different? Could you? Please.
Yeah, I suppose they refer to the data. So actually, we didn't use any platform or statistical method. What we did was we recorded all the meetings. So we recorded the breakout groups in the 2 meetings in February, and we also recorded the outreach event. We also took personal notes, but there were other type of exercise where people had to write their own things, where people had to write on sticky, on billboards. So what we did was we listened to the recording, we read the notes, and actually we did a sort of qualitative analysis like you would do with the MVivo, but actually we had, we just extracted the main emerging themes from the discussion in order to build this narrative. Of course, the work is a bit more detailed of what I presented today. Today I did a very packed presentation, so I just wanted to illustrate the most important things. But no, in terms of we didn't use a statistical method, but again, because we rely on the power of storytelling. We let people talk, and then we try to understand which were the themes which overlapped or we thought could be more important for the discussion.
Okay. Thank you for your answer. We have another question by Ali Kamis. In what ways do you think the urban planning can enhance the conservation of both tangible and intangible cultural values in the face of massive stressors such as climate change and rapid urbanization?
Okay, yeah, that is the usual $1,000,000 question, which probably doesn't have a proper answer, but it needs a more articulated answer. Needless to say, urban planning is super, super important. We had policymakers and planners that participated in our meeting, and on the one side, they need to operate based on their mandates, which is, first of all, they need to understand that they do this because they need to protect people. But in terms of planning, I think that you need to intervene in terms of planning in a comprehensive way. So urban planning is not just having a proper road, but is also having, for example, a system of transportation that can protect, for example, in the case of Wales, mass tourism in the summer, a lot of cars. So can you have a different way for transporting people from place A to place B in order not to cause car pressure on places which are small, don't have enough parking, and so on? First. Second, rapid urbanization. Well, the secret is don't build in areas which are at risk of with the areas which are most at risk of climate change or most at risk of floods. For example, Wales is going through a rapid urbanization with new development approval in coastal areas which can be at risk of flooding. So how can you ensure the sustainability of place and the protection of people if you are going to build in these areas? I think that what is important is a sort of integrated approach which take into account all the challenges of climate change, not just on cultural heritage, but also on sustainability on the everyday life of people. This is what is central. So the life is a life-centered approach means exactly this. So focusing on the life of people and not just on climate change or on tourism.
Yes, thank you very much. We have another question again from Suzanne Moradi. Do you think can the participation of local people, tourists, and experts act as a basic solution for safe cultural heritage? This is not only important but very delicate question.
Absolutely. That is, I think that this is what I was trying to say today. So the participation of local people is important because if they establish a dialogue with experts, the experts, which are not just the academics, but also the policymakers, the practitioners, they can understand better what happens on the ground, because this is the problem we always face. I mean, very often we talk, but we don't know what happens on the ground. So local people can tell us what happens. But also tourism is important because, of course, in a context, okay, you Bruno, you were talking about Pompeii, but I mean,
it was only an example. It was only
just bringing the example of Wales. Tourism is not just an issue; it's also an opportunity for economic opportunity, but also cultural opportunity. So we don't have to see tourism as an enemy. We need to see tourism as a human fact that must be governed in order to still enjoy the place, but without destroying the life of people in that place. One example, of course, can be Venice, probably the most classical example of Venice in Italy, where now tourists must, there is a maximum number of tourists that can go to visit the city every day in order to avoid the overconsumption of resources, or or to bother the local people. But anyway, as I mentioned in one of the slides, we need to have these different approaches. So local people have their own knowledge and their own mission. Tourists the same, expert the same. We need to put them in a dialogue together in order to compromise across the different positions.
Yeah, I don't know if there is any other, just like to see. No, for the moment, not. No, I wanted to ask you, it's not a question directly, but this question of the local knowledge or the knowledge of the local people, it is strictly connected in your speech with to avoid romanticization for local knowledge, or is something you mean differently?
No, I mean, the local knowledge is what people can tell us about their emotions, their feelings.
Yes. Yeah, the experience,
course,
the tradition,
yeah,
and so on.
Of course, we need to avoid the romanticization. We need to avoid to say, okay, this is what they are telling us. This is what we need to do. So, I mean, not everyone tell good things or things that are real,
Sometimes also the academicians don't say
yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But this consideration first starts from a self-reflection on ourselves. Most of the people, I mean, for sure, Ali for sure knows, our research field is going through a huge reflection on the bad things we have done in the past, and I'm sure also archaeologists now they are reflecting on how to avoid, how to work with local communities, how to avoid, the colonialism of archaeology or the colonialism of research. So this is so starting from the consideration that we did things wrong, even though we thought we did things well. We also know that people have the knowledge, but we need to understand what type of knowledge is useful, what type of knowledge is right, and not to say, oh, it's right just because they told us. So also because at the local level, there are power structure, there are inequalities as well. So we always need to filter this type of knowledge, like we filter the knowledge we have and we create. So that is I think this is what we need to do actually.
Yeah. I remember that in Italy we have many local institutions like the Proloco, probably in Italian, so it's Latin word, where the local people, especially the old one, they know a lot of information, but of course they do not know, or they are not able sometimes to make interpretation about that. But in any case, that is very useful. And also the publication. I'm collecting from every part of Italy this Proloco publication. That's fundamental. Of course, they don't have scientific answers or scientific interpretation. Okay. I wanted to check if there is any other. No, I don't see.
I don't see any other question.
Okay. So I think that I personally thank very much Giuseppe Forino. We are Italian from the same provenience, local and geographical provenience. And I pass the voice to Kurosh or to Ali Asghari if there is anything else to make conclusion or to thank from officially point of view, please.
Thank you very much, Giuseppe, for a great presentation. And this was really, really interesting because it, from many angles, it complemented some of the previous talks that we had, and the need and special attention to this multi-perspective angle, and especially looking into public participation and feedback and knowledge into this whole concept of climate change impacts on cultural heritage. Thank you so much. This was also a good case study going into different parts of the world I'm sure you can share with us more of this research, and we are looking forward to get that. And thank you, Professor Forino, for moderating this session so nicely.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
And
It's
thank you
very interesting
also for
for me.
joining
Thank you
us
very much.
in all sessions. This is so good to have you with us, and I appreciate very much. And thank you, Kurosh, for the introduction. And just to finish, that we will continue this series. The next session will be on January 22 with another talk on spatial vulnerability assessment to climate threats in World Heritage Cities. And so we are looking again to have you all with us, and thank you all the participants for being and participating in this discussion, and all those who engaged in Q&A. With that, we are going to finish this session. And again, thank you all, and hope to see you soon in the next session.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the participants and to York University for inviting me. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye,
Bye-bye.
Giuseppe. Bye-bye.
Thank
See
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.